Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to promote themselves and their businesses to be as successful as possible. And today, we're really going to talk about that word promote, because it's something that I think many small business owners and entrepreneurs struggle with, is how to get their message, their information out there. And let's be honest, right now during the pandemic, it's probably even more so. People are thinking, how on earth do I get my message out there? If you're a professional speaker, especially, we're not getting in front of audiences, or if we are, it's online. And so there is a great way that every business owner, every entrepreneur should be considering to get their knowledge out to the people who want it, and that's to write a book. And before everybody goes, oh my God, I can't write a book, we're going to talk about how to do that. And we're going to do that with my guest, Laura Gale. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me, Deb. It's lovely to be here.
Great. Well, I'm going to read your bio and then we will jump into this because we've got tons of questions and tons of things to discuss. So Laura Gale got her start as a publicist for Hachette, a global publishing house, and worked on projects like the Twilight phenomenon, J.K. Rowling's post-Harry Potter publications, and the personal memoirs of Michael Palin, Nelson Mandela, and Tina Fey. She started Laura is Writing to help entrepreneurs to write, publish, and market books that transform their businesses and leave a legacy they're proud of. She has ghostwritten over 15 books and has helped dozens of authors to edit and market their books. She is also the author of How to Write This Book, Write, Publish, and Market Your Business Bestseller, and Content That Converts, How to Build a Profitable and Predictable B2B Content Marketing Strategy. Laura is also the co-host of the Business Writing Podcast. Born and raised in Sydney, Australia, Laura now lives in Lisbon, Portugal. So again, Laura, welcome.
Thank you, Deb.
Well, you've had quite the career, and you're a youngster. We're just going to say it. You're a youngster. I always love it when I start interviewing guests and I realize I could be your mother. But you've had quite the career. So tell us a little bit more about that, and more importantly, how you discovered that this is your passion in life.
I was really fortunate right out of university to land an internship at that publishing house, and just got an incredibly immersive experience in the publishing world. It's one of the biggest publishers out there, and they just have some of the most amazing authors on their list. And so I mean, some of it was trial by fire, I won't lie. It was, working with such high profile people, you really have to get it right first time. So there's not a lot of margin for error when you're learning. But in 2011, when the ebook phenomenon was really taking off, Amazon was really starting to gain a lot of traction. The publishing industry really took a hit. And so there were a lot of people laid off from my company that year. And I was really fortunate that I did keep my job, but I felt that, okay, I've really got to acknowledge that this industry is changing faster than I know how to keep up. And I probably need to be a little bit proactive in managing my future career prospects. So I decided that I would try and strike out on my own, and started offering writing services to anyone who would take them, basically. And over time that evolved into a particular client asking if I would help him write a book, because he knew that I had come out of the publishing world, and he said, oh, you know it mostly, you'll figure out the rest, you know where to look. And so I said, okay, how high can it be? It's really just another article, but a really long
it's
one.
Just long.
So that project went really well, and I had a great time and really enjoyed how immersive that was compared to a lot of the short form work I was doing. And so I started offering it as a service to more clients, and more people said yes, and word of mouth got around, and I just felt like I had really stumbled onto this niche that was really satisfying and gave me an opportunity to really stretch myself creatively and professionally, and has given me a huge amount of flexibility. And I get, like you, I get to spend my days talking to very interesting people, and I've learned a lot business-wise from the process. So yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind process, but really quite amazing.
Great. And I love the fact that you can live anywhere. I mean, this whole virtual world that we're in now, made obviously much more complicated because of the pandemic, but we can work anywhere, because you can interview somebody via Zoom or, whichever technology, all the email, all of these various things. So that makes it really cool because you can be anywhere. You could be in Portugal.
Yeah. I actually left Sydney in 2013, and I have been living abroad ever since.
Cool. I love it. I love it. Well, you talk about the fact that business books are very powerful for a business, and in particular for a person, for the entrepreneur, for the business owner, that expert. Why is that? Why is having a book such a great tool?
There are so many different ways you can use a book to promote yourself and your business. Firstly, it's an extremely powerful indicator that you are the expert you are claiming to be. You can't really write a book, a full-length proper book, a few hundred pages, if you don't really know what you're talking about.
Right.
And it's a really powerful way to set yourself apart from your competition as well, because most people are not going to go to the lengths required to write and then publish and then market their book. It's a multi-stage process, and each one requires quite a lot of time and energy. And so it is a real commitment, but I think of it as creating a moat around your business. It creates a real competitive advantage. It creates a gap that is very difficult for your competitors to catch up. And to your earlier point, that particularly for people who are doing public speaking and that kind of thing, who are having difficulty with the more in-person aspect of the business now, you can think of your book as your envoy or your ambassador. It goes out into the world to represent you when you can't physically be there. And so it's a really great option if you're trying to book more speaking engagements or book interviews. You can send a copy of your book to the people organizing, and it immediately proves to them that you're a good bet for whatever it is they're putting together. And it's the same thing for getting past gatekeepers if you're trying to acquire new clients and they're having trouble kind of connecting with the right people. I mean, honestly, I could go on, but there are so many ways that a book leverages your expertise, places you at a much higher position in people's minds, partly because we really value books as a culture. They've been around many hundreds of years, and they still, you can see in my bookshelf here behind me, there's hundreds and hundreds of books being published all the time. But even so, the fact that they're common doesn't make them less valuable. And so it's a real top of mind strategy as well. So when you're wanting to make sure that people are thinking about doing business with you, having a physical copy of your book in their home or their office or even on their device means that your name pops up all the time in their world. And if they are thinking about doing business in your sphere, then obviously the more exposure they've had to you, the more likely a choice you are going to be for them.
Right. And I had a partial copy of your book, so hold it up. How to Write This Book, Write, Publish, and Market Your Business Bestseller. And one of the things you were talking about it was kind of when to write a book. And it's what I appreciated was the fact that it's not always the right time to write a book. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
As I said before, writing a book is quite a serious undertaking. And many people will publish very short books, maybe 50 or 80 pages, and that's fine. I think if you're going to make the effort to do it, then go all the way. Right. And to my mind, that means 150, 200, 250 pages. So it's quite a significant undertaking to do it. But also, it's not a simple thing to manage the significant increase in lead flow that a book can create. So I had a client once who told me that inefficiency scales with growth. And so if your systems have any breakages in them, or they do break under pressure, or things are not working very smoothly because you just haven't had the time and the reps needed to kind of iron out those problems, those are going to compound very quickly if your lead flow, say, becomes 3 or 5 times what it has been previously. And that's often very common with what my clients are experiencing. So most clients see a 3 to 5 times increase in their lead flow within the first 3 to 6 months of having a book out in the market. So it's a really powerful tool, but if you're very early on, that can be a very overwhelming influx. And if your systems are broken and your people don't know how to handle all of this sudden attention and activity, you squander a lot of the goodwill that the book has generated, and people feel disappointed that you're not able to deliver on what you've been promising. And so it can do a lot of damage if you're not ready, compared to when you are ready, you've had the time, you've got the systems really robust. At that point, it makes total sense. If you're ready to scale, you feel like you've got everything pinned down, and everybody knows that action stations, we know what to do, time to go, then that's a great moment to do it.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking, we mentioned a public speaker, their product is themselves. Yeah. And, and so they might publish a book that, they're an expert on talking about, widgets, but they're not ready to travel that much. Maybe they don't really have a good presentation yet, some things like that. And so I like the fact that you talk about, we need to make sure our ducks are in a row before we put that book out there.
Yeah, I think talking about having a good presentation, having a book really forces you to hone your message as well. It really forces you to clarify what you stand for, what your processes are, who your audience is. And so it's a very useful tool for other parts of your business as well. It can really help you get a lot of clarity around things that maybe you haven't really had to think about before. So it's very useful, but you do want to do it at the moment when you personally and your business have the resources to put towards it.
Right. And the resources is also the book. Now, granted, things are a little bit different now because we can print on demand. But years ago, I had a client that hired me to be a publicist for them for their book. And she had this wonderful book. It was a personal story about something that she had gone through. And it was interesting working with her because and you've worked as, in a publicist organization. And so, and so she wanted to be on Oprah's Book of the Month. Right. Nothing in between, it wasn't, hey, let's make, our local, top 10 book or anything. It was, I want to be on Oprah's. And so I tried to explain, okay, Oprah doesn't just get, yes, your book is great, but I told her, I said, more importantly, if you are on Oprah's book, I said, I'm assuming that immediately there's a ton of orders. I mean, could you fulfill an order of, say, 30,000 books overnight? And which something like that would not be inconceivable if you're on something like that, or you make the New York Times bestseller, some things like that. And she said, well, no. I said, okay, then we're going to back up and we're going to promote your book locally. We're going to get you on the local talk shows that, get you interviewed, and then kind of move from there. And I think that, so many people think, oh, I've got this great book. It's going to do fantastic things, but they forget that, okay, there is a process to build up to it. And then maybe they'll do the fantastic things.
Absolutely. And I think it's great to have big goals for what you want the book to do. But I think people forget that the audience for Oprah lives in local communities.
Right.
People who watch Oprah are also reading the local paper, watching the local news stations, reading, magazines that have been published. There's so many ways to access your ideal audience. And I think there's just a massive ways that you can promote a book, but going for those very high visibility, very, very popular platforms is not always the best option, because there's a huge amount of competition for getting onto those programs. But also, like you say, there can be a lot of logistical complications that come from it. And you're missing a huge chunk of really, really easy ones that will take much less time and attention from you. And can create the same kind of momentum that will then later on lead you to those bigger opportunities.
Right. And it was interesting when I was reading your book, what it was reminding me is a book is a really big marketing tool, you know, and that's the way that we really need to approach it is, you know, we've got a blog, we've got a website, we've got this, we've got that, and we have a book. And so one of the things that you talk about in your book is the fact that you really have to know who you are writing for. And that is so key because, you know, I hear this all the time because I have a marketing firm. I will say, now, who's your target audience? And they all look at me and they smile sweetly and they say, everyone. No.
No, it's not.
Never, ever, ever. You know, it doesn't matter what your subject matter is, what your product or service is. It is not for everyone. So talk to us a little bit about how you need to figure out who you're writing for, because that really is one of the most critical pieces, if not the most critical piece of writing.
Absolutely. I think I understand the appeal of writing to everybody, but unfortunately,
because you want to sell a whole bunch of books, right?
Of course, but much more effective to sell it to people who are very, very squarely within your niche, and then gradually spread out if you find that there's a wider audience, than trying to sell it to everybody and discovering that it's good for no one. Right. So I think it's one of the primary foundations of any marketing campaign is knowing who you're talking to. And as you said, when you're writing a book about your business, and specifically for the purpose of growing your business, you do have to think of it as just another marketing tool. And you wouldn't start any other type of campaign without clearly defining who you are trying to put this campaign in front of. And so once you've got a sense, let's say a book I worked on recently was written for the chief marketing officers of Fortune 5,000 level companies. And so that's a very specific group of people. So it's a very, very useful marketing book for anybody who is selling online, but it's specifically written for those people. And the reason that's useful is twofold. First is it gets those people's attention. You can specifically say in the title or in your marketing, this is who this book is for.
Right.
And so
and if you're that person, you go, oh, that's me.
Oh, that's me. So obviously I need to have this book. And then secondly, it means that it's a very clear offer that you're going to be leading them to. And we can talk about that a little bit as well. Your book always should lead to some other way for people to engage with you.
Yeah.
But it sets an expectation that you are here to serve those people. And that's a really important factor. And I think there are always multiple audiences for a book, but I think of it as your primary reader is this person that you are very clearly defining this book is for you. And then there are going to be secondary and tertiary audiences as well. And so those might be other marketers who work online, and then other marketers generally. But ultimately, you're looking at this very specific group, because that also helps you when you're writing the book to think about what is going to be most useful to those people to hear. If you're writing for everybody, it's very hard to narrow down your focus, and not all information belongs in this one book. You know, just because you know a huge amount about a topic doesn't mean that all of it has to go into this particular project. And so knowing who you're writing for helps you filter your own flow of information, but it also means that the book is going to be as impactful as possible and is going to get the best response possible. And because online sales and, you know, Amazon and all of these online platforms run so heavily on reviews, it's really important that your audience is very responsive to what you're talking about. And so having their needs and wants in mind when you're writing means that in the future, as they're reading, they're going to be 100% committed to helping you get that book out to everybody, because it helped them so much.
Right. You know, and it really does help to know exactly who you're writing for. And I tell people, you know, if they're struggling with that, and, you know, I work with clients all the time to develop that avatar. And it's not, you know, and you talk about this in your book, it's not just, okay, it's this person who makes this amount of money, you know, all these various things. There's more. I mean, you have to know what their, you know, what guides them, what are their passions, you know, what do they not like, all of these various things. And so I often tell people, find a picture of who that might represent, put it so that, you know, it's on your computer monitor or wherever. So you're actually writing for that person. And then that really helps to focus your mind into what your message should be.
Absolutely. I do that myself, actually. I try and find somebody that I actually know personally and think, okay, they're a good fit for what I'm writing here. And so I'm going to write this to them because I know exactly what they want and need. But I mean, going back to the earlier point, there's a difference between demographics and psychographics. So demographics are the facts about people. You know, you live in...
They make $50,000 a year. They
money,
live...
They have 2.5 kids. You know, these are just documentable facts. But those don't make up who that person is. So are they spiritual? Are they mission driven in their business? Are they you know, what drives them? What scares them? What keeps them up at night? You know, a few marketers, I think Dan Kennedy talks about the whiskey test. You know, what gets them up at 3 a.m. and finds their spouse sitting in the kitchen thinking over a cup of whiskey. Like, you know, what's that impetus? What's that fear? What drives them? And so getting to understand, as you said, their inner world is really important. And a lot of that comes from actually engaging with the audience, which I think a lot of people are quite resistant to doing. Feels a bit scary to sort of go that extra step and actually start talking to people who you think are in your audience. You can find a lot of stuff that contradicts your assumptions there. And so that's challenging and uncomfortable. But it's going to mean that your project is much more successful in the long term because you're writing based on real people, not, you know, 2D versions of people.
Right. You know, and it's always interesting when it contradicts what you think, because then you got to get over your own ego, you know, to go, oh, so what they really care about is X. I assumed, you know, that it was something else.
Yes. Yeah. And it happens a lot when you're writing, because one of the really important stages of writing a book is letting some early readers see it. So this might be customers who have been buying from you for many years, or people who work with you in your business, friends, that kind of thing. And to see where people get stuck, or they're bored or confused, or they think, oh, this is not really relevant, or something is missing. It can be really shocking because you think, I've put all of this work into this book and it's really good. I'm nearly ready to publish. And then you think, oh no, there's a whole gap here that needs to be reworked. And it can be hard on the ego. That process is very difficult, but it's a very positive process in the long run, because you get a much better grip on what your audience wants and what the value is that you provide to them.
Right. You know, and it is, you know, I want to talk about the, you know, I'm harping on this because it is so important. You know, I do however many programs a year, 100-ish programs a year. Many of these programs are, my guests are authors. So I read a lot of books, and I had one not long ago that, you know, based on what he was saying, based on what the publicist said, all those various things, I was exactly the target market. So yeah, I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. It was an incredibly technical book.
Right.
And, you know, I couldn't read it. I really could not read it because it was so technical that my brain just shut off. You know, I couldn't understand it. I didn't know the terms. It used, you know, lots of things that I just had no grasp of. And, you know, and I have no doubt that it was great information, but it wasn't written in a way that me, the little, you know, average reader could understand. You know, and we see that all the time. I was in a mastermind group earlier this week, and we were laughing about that. And I said, you know, I used to work for the American Cancer Society. And frequently, and I did media relations. So frequently I'd be sending our doctors off to do media interviews. And I said, now, you can't use your words that have 26 letters in them. People don't understand that. You know, and so, you know, that was a big part of the process. And we were laughing that we're not saying that you're dumbing it down. You know, when we read all the time, well, you have to write at the 8th grade level. And you have to write for your audience. You know, if your audience reads at the 8th grade level, well, then that's what you have to write at. But, you know, if you have a technical audience and you dumb it down, they're not going to like it either, because they're going to, you know, and so figure out exactly who you're writing for and do that. You know, if you have to include some technical terms, that's great, but explain them and then explain them multiple times for those of us that forget these things, you know, all of those various things.
Absolutely. I think of my role as to be an advocate for the reader in these processes. And so my role is to ask all of those questions that a reader would be like, what does that even mean? You know, I get to ask that so that they don't have to.
Right.
But there's this curse of knowledge in a lot of entrepreneurs where they've been in business for such a long time. They are so good at the thing that they do, but they forget that other people don't have that same frame of reference. And so they can be just barreling along, you know, spilling out information, but you've lost people miles back. So you really got to think about, what do people know and what do people need to know in order to keep progressing with this material. And so information hierarchy is a really, really important component of getting your book right. So what are the very foundational things that this reader needs to understand in order to progress to this next stage? And if you're writing for a technical audience, people who are very advanced in your field already, you can probably do a very cursory skimming over, just a quick summary of that to make sure everybody's on the same page, there's no confusion. But if it's a much less technical audience or people who are very new to this field, then you do need to set that foundation for them and lead them through a very sequential process so that they're not left behind at any point.
Right. And it actually might mean multiple books that you're doing, you know, because you can have multiple audiences. So you might have the very technical book, but then you might also have the book for everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's nothing wrong with separating your audience out like that. And I mean, obviously you can get into some very technical marketing where you're segmenting lists and all kinds of things, but understanding who your audience is really critical. And again, that comes back to knowing who you're writing for, as we were talking about before. You know, if your audience is made up of some very new people to this field and some very advanced people, then you do want to be messaging those people differently. You know, they should not be receiving the same material because they're at completely different stages. They have completely different capacities and they're wanting different things from you. The value you can provide to them is going to be very different because they're at such different stages. And so it is important to really consider that you're not writing for a general audience. There is really no quote unquote general audience.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, just looking at the books that I mentioned in your bio, I mean, somebody who reads something about Nelson Mandela is probably not also going to care about Tina Fey. I mean, you know, it's just very different.
But they're completely divergent. And yeah, there are a lot of principles that overlap. There's a lot of foundational stuff that is always going to be.
Oh yeah. We're going to talk about editing. And, you know.
But ultimately the tone and the positioning and all of that kind of stuff is very dependent on what the subject is.
Right. Yeah. You know, I would imagine a book about Tina Fey might have, shall we say, some salty words. You know, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, you know, because that's what she is. I mean, especially if you're talking about, you know, you're saying, okay, well, when she was on stage, this was what she did. Well, you know, she said those words, but Nelson Mandela's not going to, you know, and you know, and it's interesting. You know, I had somebody approach me one time who wanted to be a guest on the program, and you know, I look at her Facebook page and the woman couldn't do a sentence without the F word in it. I mean, that was just her, you know, and I listened to some other things. Now, at that point, this actually was a broadcast a type of interview. So we had guidelines that we had to follow. And now even, you know, if you want your podcast on Apple, on iTunes, you have to say that it's clean. You know, when I'm thinking, you know, that's kind of, but you know, and so I talked to her a little bit and I said, you can't do that. You know, that's just not what's going to happen. And it wasn't, you know, something that every once in a while I could beep out. It was, you know, she swore like a sailor. And so she said, well, that's who I work with. You know, her clients were very edgy people. You know, they were, you know, skateboarders. They were, you know, they were 18, 20 years old, you know, things like that. And I said, well, I'm sorry, this just isn't going to work. I'm sure it would have been a fascinating interview and fun to talk with her, but yeah, we just couldn't do that. And so, yeah, that is kind of the thing, you know, back to, you have to keep in mind exactly who you're writing for.
Yes. Yeah. And there is a balance to be struck between your personality and your personal brand and the audience, but hopefully those things are already aligned. And that's going back to making sure you're ready to write this book. Is have you made sure that your personality and your brand is aligned with the audience's values and what they're expecting and what they want from you.
Right. Well, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, oh my gosh, I would like to write a book. I'm such an expert. I would love to write a book, all those various things. But then they think, I can't write a book, which is where someone like you comes in, because you're a ghostwriter. So, and I love this. I was reading your LinkedIn profile, and you don't write about ghosts. And it's funny because there are a lot of ghostwriters there are a lot of books that are written by ghostwriters, and you might see it in tiny little print. It all depends on a variety of things. But tell us what a ghostwriter does.
A ghostwriter is there to help you tell your story, basically. So my role is to extract all of the information and experience and knowledge that you have accumulated over the course of your career and help you put that into words in such a way that it really lands with your audience and moves them to do whatever it is you're hoping to do with them. Many people for a very long time considered ghostwriting cheating, because
especially if it was like a biography or something. It's like,
right. You're supposed to write it yourself. And I do understand that, but I think ultimately for a lot of entrepreneurs, actually doing the writing is not the highest.
Right. We're talking about a product or a service. We're not really talking about ourselves.
Exactly. I mean, even if you are talking about yourself, I mean, Andre Agassi wrote an amazing biography called Open, and he's this fantastic tennis player and one of the best in the world. He's a world-class tennis player. He's not a world-class
He's not a writer.
He's not a memoirist. And he was very open about the fact that he did work with a ghostwriter to produce that book. But that book is completely him. There's no trace of the ghostwriter in it. And that's always what I'm aiming for, is to capture the client's voice and experience and really have the reader be totally immersed in their world with no thought at all that this doesn't sound like them or this doesn't feel like them. You know, my goal is always that the book is totally the client. And so part of my process there is just doing a huge amount of interviewing. So we have many conversations over many weeks where I'm just recording your voice and your language and the way you speak, the cadence of your speech. And so there's a lot that goes into creating somebody's voice on page. But my whole point there is to get as much of you down as I can, to record as much of you as I can, so that when I go to drafting, I'm only using stuff that you've already said to me. It's all your information. It's nothing that I've come up with on my own. It's all from the conversations that we've been having together.
Right. You know, and like you said, people have different cadences. There are some people who talk in very short sentences. Some people that, you know, a paragraph is one sentence. You know, all of these various things, the language that they use, you know, and so that's where, and it's almost, you know, it's like, you know, you read the book and you meet the person and you go, oh yeah. You know, you don't want to read the book and meet the person and go, nah, I read the wrong book.
right, exactly. And the goal is always that a client will come to you having read the book and say, I feel like I already know you, right? They know you, they like you, they trust you because they've got a little piece of you in their hand through this book. And that is just a really powerful way to kind of shortcut the process that you need with a lot of clients to get to the next level together.
Right. Well, and even if it's, you know, a business book, so, you know, there's still that flow of how they are, you know, so maybe they're an expert in social media, you know, how you're talking in the book about how to use it as an effective tool, you know, you know, but how they would say it is, you know, what you're aiming for.
Yeah, exactly. Because everybody is going to bring a slightly different perspective to even the most technical information. Right. And you want customers to have a really consistent experience. If they hear you on a podcast or they see you on stage or they read your book, it should all be the same. And that consistency is really important for developing trust and rapport. So yeah, even things where it might be, you might think this is very dry and there's not a lot of room for my personality and all of that kind of thing. There's always ways. And voice, you know, voice is kind of the big term, the overarching umbrella term, but it's made up of three components, and that's vocabulary, tone, and cadence, as you said. So vocabulary is the words that you use. The choice, you know, is it a 5-cent word or is it a $5 word?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very dependent as well on who your audience is. But
Mm-hmm.
there's the tone. So is it very chatty and informal, or is it very highbrow, very sophisticated, quite technical?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's cadence, which, as you say, is the speed at which you speak.
Mm-hmm.
Is it long sentences or short? Is it many, many short paragraphs kind of in a staccato format, or is it very free flowing and very lyrical? So there's a lot that goes into that, and it can be quantified, but people get a little bit overwhelmed trying to communicate that about themselves to a writer. And so I think it's the writer's job to help the client communicate that.
Right. Well, as you talk about this, I think, oh my gosh, the ghostwriter portion has got to be incredibly complicated. How did you decide that that was something that you were really good at?
I grew up in a reading family, and so had always been tinkering with writing, and I get a lot of joy and satisfaction from writing. And so helping people tell their stories is just a really, it's very fulfilling for me, because I also am a huge proponent, obviously, of literacy and education as tools to help other people progress. Literacy is a foundational skill in making your way in the world. And so I sort of felt that it was an opportunity to help people with literacy in a different part of their life. If the entrepreneur has gained a huge amount of experience over time and has something to teach, then it's a gift and an amazing opportunity to be able to share that information with other people, because you can have a real ripple effect. There's so much information locked up in so many entrepreneurs that could have such a tangible effect on the world, that I think how cool to be able to help them get it out there. So I sort of think of it as being a conduit for the information. They have this amazing thing to share. I can help them share it. And then there's a real tangible transformation in the reader and in the ripple effect that can create. So that's kind of how I think of it, and why I'm so passionate about doing it, because I know books can make such lasting change in people's lives.
Right. Well, and clearly it is a skill and a talent, especially to not put your personality into whatever it is that you're writing, because I'm sure it would just be something as simple as, well, yeah, this sentence would sound better if, and you have to not do that. I mean, yes, there are times where, and like I said, we'll talk editing in a minute, but if it would change the tone or the message, you can't do that.
It can be really challenging. And so I take frequent breaks through each project, because that's the only way I can come back with fresh eyes and say, oh, there I am. That bit needs to come out.
Oops, that was me.
Exactly. So, you need to be able to kind of monitor your own habits a little bit. But yeah, there are points at which I will, I think of writing as kind of having multiple components. So they're like building blocks that you can move around. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be verbatim what the client said. You can move things around into different places so that the flow is a bit better, because often the way we speak to each other doesn't translate very well to the page. And so if you can shuffle things around a little bit, then it often flows better for a reading format. But ultimately, I definitely come back often during editing looking for places where I have maybe just tweaked it because I think, I think it would sound a little bit better that way, but actually that's not how they would say it. And that's the kind of thing that can just jar the reader out of the flow enough that you want to really smooth it over.
Right. Does it help if it's a subject matter that you really don't know anything about?
There are two types of projects that tend to happen. One is something I know nothing about, and that's interesting because it's just an interesting learning experience for me. I can really bring that sort of beginner's mind and ask all kinds of what might be quite simple questions to begin with, but end up giving a very rounded picture of the subject. And then there's stuff that I do know about. And that's also really fun because it becomes a bit more collaborative rather than sort of a teacher-student dynamic. You have peers. And that's also really fun because you can kind of bounce ideas back and forth, and it becomes quite a dynamic, and it grows quite organically that way. So it is nice if I do have a little bit of a grasp on it.
Right. Yeah, it is obviously going to lead to very different types of questions, either teach me about this or, oh, I know about this, Anne.
Yes. Yeah.
So, well, we've talked about editing several times, and that is one of the services that you provide. And we'll talk a little bit later about that. But, when people write, we all tend to think, ooh, we write good. And whether and I'm one of these people, I have trouble on Facebook because I mentally correct what people are writing. And it doesn't matter if they're writing about their cat or if they're writing about their business. I don't ever, I'm not the grammar police. I'm not going to say, Laura, you misspelled that word. But we all need editing. And I think that's one of the tricky things with writing is recognizing the fact that we need somebody to look at it. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned, I get all these books, and I mean, I have bookshelf after bookshelf, and then I have a lot of digital versions of the books. And there are so many times where I want to tell somebody, you should have hired an editor. And it can be some things just as simple as typos, and I tell people we see what we want it to be. And so we miss the misspellings. We miss all those things. And so, that's just one of the skills. How do people improve their skills? Because we need to, even if we're just writing on Facebook or our LinkedIn profile or something like that, but how are some ways that we can improve our own skills?
So in publishing, there are a few different types of editing. And so I think people think of it as proofreading a lot of the time, looking for typos, but that's the very end of the editing process. So first is a structural edit. So you're looking for chunks of information that are better placed somewhere else. So you're reading through and think, oh, maybe this paragraph or this sentence should come earlier, or this sounds like a conclusion, but it's really much too early in the actual piece, and so it should come later. You're looking for pieces that need to be moved around in the information hierarchy so that the piece flows as smoothly and naturally or intuitively as possible. You don't want a point where any reader is going to say, what? I need to go back and
flipping back and forth. I missed something.
Scrolling forward to try and find out what it is. You want it to just be completely intuitive and smooth. So that's the structural edit, is getting those kind of big pieces in place. Then you're looking for copy editing, which is the tone. Am I writing in the right style for the subject material? Am I using the right type of dialogue and that kind of thing? Are you writing for an American audience but using British English?
Right. I know the Queen writes differently. She has U's where we don't have U's. That's always the biggie. Like color is not spelled that way.
Sorry, but even things like describing someone as cheeky is a very British word. Not necessarily going to translate to an American audience. And there are words like that, many of them. So you're wanting to think about, is this going to sound right to the person who's reading it? Is there anything that's going to trip them up in terms of, vague meaning? Are there words that are too sophisticated for this post or piece of writing? Are there words that need to be kind of brought up a level? You're looking for that kind of middle layer of, does it sound right? And then final layer is what people think of generally when that's proofreading, or going line by line, looking for any grammatical errors, any typos, any punctuation problems, just making sure that it's really perfected and polished. So those are the 3 stages that you can go through. You can do each of those stages as many times as you would like. Most professionally produced books, published books, are going to go through probably 2 to 3 rounds of each of those. So there's a lot that goes into editing, and people get a bit daunted by that process because you've gone through this whole process of writing the book and actually putting out all of this material.
It's their baby.
And you don't want to go back and rework it and rework it and rework it, but that reworking process is what makes it great. It can take good material to being amazing, and it can take mediocre material to being really, really good. So that process is really important. And it can be tedious. I won't lie. It's not the most fun part of the process, but it's definitely very, very valuable. And editing is there to make your final piece as polished and professional as possible.
I still remember years ago, I was in, and I think it was an English class in college. And, you turned in paper copies of things and, came back and, red pen all over everything. And the professor said, they're words. They're not your babies. And I, obviously I still remember that. And that was a long time ago, but we get so vested in it because it is our passion. It might be our story. So when the editor says, this needs to be here, or you talked about that 5 times, we only want to talk about it twice, we tend to think, oh my gosh, you're hurting us. And of course the editor is just making it better.
Yes, it's difficult. And I mean, there's a saying in editing circles, kill your darlings. And it's similar to it's not your babies. There are words and phrases and ideas that we get very attached to in writing. And it sounds crazy, but, you'll think, oh, wow, that sounds really great. Or I love that turn of phrase. Or, I feel really pleased about how that is sounding. And then someone else will read it. And because they don't have the context that you have in your own mind, they'll be like, I don't understand that at all, or that makes no sense, or this sounds ridiculous, you're being completely, overdoing it or whatever. And so it's really a practice in detaching from that product. It's, if you can think of it more as documentation than self-expression, sometimes that can help. A lot of people find it very difficult to think of it that way, but yeah, your ego is going to take a few beatings in that process.
Yeah, and I will say it's very difficult to edit your own work. And I don't care if it's impossible. A Facebook post or a 300-page book. Depending on how important it is, you need somebody else to read it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there are no writers who should be editing their own work. Right.
Because we get so caught up in it, or I know what I meant to say. All of those various things.
Exactly. And you let yourself off the hook a lot when you're editing your own stuff. But I mean, obviously you have to be involved in the editing process. And so I think you can go through a few of those rounds on your own, because you will see things second, third time around that you think, that's an obvious fix. I need to address that. It's not worth somebody else's time to tell me something that I already have identified. Right. But once you've gone through that and you can't really see anything that's wrong with it anymore, that's the point that somebody else needs to come in and read it. So whether that's a professional editor or somebody, that's a friend and who has some good writing skills, who is going to give you the honest truth about what they think needs to happen, that is just an extremely, extremely valuable thing. And no book that you've, read by a traditional publisher has gone without that process.
Right. It's always interesting when I'm reading something that I know has been read by many, many people, and I find an error. I'm like,
yes, it does happen though, right? And people are, everyone's fallible.
It's like, I don't think there's supposed to be 2 periods there.
Yeah, I was reading a book just a month ago by a very famous author who's won many, many prizes, and there was an inconsistency in how they were presenting a particular set of words. Wow. It still gets through.
Oh yeah. And that's very interesting. And we can obviously improve our own skills. There's all sorts of things. I saw somebody on Facebook the other day who posted, and they're taking, they said, now is a great time to be taking some online classes. And so, she had found a great, and she was actually, it was a writing class, and she said, this is a great time to be doing this. I'm really only working 6 hours a day, and I'm not commuting. So I've got this extra time. And so she was taking an online class. And, I think we're going to see more and more that there's going to be online opportunities, and there's going to be big online opportunities. I mean, you could be taking a writing class from, say Oxford, or an online class from your local community college. But it's going to be so much easier to be working on our skills.
Absolutely. And there's just such a wealth of information out there. Most of the time, if you're wanting to learn something, someone has written about it.
Right.
And someone has made a course about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think educating yourself is just such an amazing opportunity, and it's just the barrier to entry is so low compared to what it used to be, that there's no better time. I mean, I understand that during pandemic, everybody thought at the beginning, oh, I'm going to have so much free time. And for some people,
And
that's
it got
true,
filled. It's amazing how that happened.
People, it did not go that way. So there's also, I think if you're feeling like, oh, at the start of pandemic, I was going to try and write my book and I haven't done it yet, don't get down on yourself. It's okay.
Right.
It's been hard.
And writing skills are something that I think, it's just so important as a business professional. There are people that I literally, and granted, this is maybe a little snarky. I won't do business with them based on what they write online. And I'm not talking about the subject matter. I'm talking about, if they don't, there was years ago, financial planner. He did not know the difference between, and this, you're going to die, ARE and OUR.
Right.
Yeah. So R and hour. He used them interchangeably, and I'm like, dude, why would I entrust you with my money if you don't know something that basic? And that's kind of, what we need to think about is, how are we coming across as a business professional? Even if it's just your Facebook post, Instagram, clearly LinkedIn, you better not have typos. But how are you coming across as that?
Yeah. And I can understand, spelling is not everybody's strong suit.
Right. And we're writing it on our phone with, a finger that doesn't always work. So we have typos.
For sure, it happens, but I think this is kind of where the editing process is really important, is just taking a few seconds to read back over what you've written and just take a little bit of care there, because your writing does go out in the world as a representation of you. And so, showing people, particularly if you're trying to do business with them, that you are good with the details and that you can be trusted with important parts of their world, that's a very important time to take.
So, somebody's decided, I'm going to write a book. I've got this great subject matter I need to dump out in the world. People are going to love it. But then we still get lost. So what are some other things that you wish people knew when they actually started this process?
I think setting some accurate expectations for yourself is important. So as you said, Deb, writing is a skill set, and it's not a skill set that everybody has time to hone. And so if you are reading your favorite author and they've written dozens of books, it's not very realistic to expect that what you produce first time around is going to be the same as what they can do. Right. And so Ira Glass, who's the NPR radio host, talks about the gap. And this is the difference between your taste and what you can identify is great work and what you're able to put out. And it can take years before you're able to bridge that gap. And the trick is to keep going. And it takes practice, it takes time. And, I've been writing since I was 18. And, it's taken quite a long time to kind of get to the point where I feel like that gap is starting to close. Even now, sometimes I'll be like, it's not quite there. And I can feel that it's not there. And I'm still unraveling why that is. So if you're new to this, it's okay if there is a gap there. So be a little bit gracious towards yourself, and don't give up if the product that you see first time around doesn't match what you were hoping it would be. Keep going with that process. Another is to consider about getting some help. So it's very hard to see what you don't know. If you're new to something, it's always useful to have a teacher or somebody who's a bit more experienced with you to sort of guide you through that process and can say, oh, you're missing this. That's why this isn't working. Here's how you get out of this pickle that you find yourself in. So that's really important. And also just setting yourself some milestones. It's not realistic to expect that you're going to write a chapter every day. It's probably a few hundred words every day. So setting yourself some milestones that you want to hit, a chapter a month, or, setting yourself some specifics so that you have a bit of a structure to how you're trying to do that work.
I love it. And certainly your book goes into much more detail. One of the things that we didn't talk about was, doing an outline. That's probably we've all read books, right, where they've just rambled and babbled along, and whether it's a business book or a fiction book, and it's like, oh, they didn't know where they were trying to end up. And so do the outline, do things like that. But you work with people to do this. We mentioned that you ghostwrite, you also edit, and you can coach. So tell us just a little bit more about the services that you can provide.
So ghostwriting is a complete done-for-you service. You'll tell me your idea and what you want it to be and what you want it to do in your business, and then we'll go through that interview process that we talked about, set out all of the outline, and I will go and build the book based on those conversations that we have. So I'll take you all the way from idea to published and available for sale. The editing process is when you have written something or you're in the process of writing something and you need someone to either help you get it finished or revise, go through all of those different rounds of editing and make sure that it's really polished and professional so that it can be published. And coaching is a much more done with you kind of service. So we'll have a call every week and set specific milestones for the project, give you some specific tasks to do so that it keeps going and kind of develops its own momentum.
Great. Now, does it have to be a full book, or do you work with people on, say, articles, ebooks, even maybe their LinkedIn profile?
So I don't really do short form writing like that anymore. I specialize specifically in book length. But I'm happy to advise people. People can book an hour and we can talk about whatever they want. That's also totally fine because the structures are often similar and the problems people run into are similar. So definitely happy to jump on the phone for an hour and go through that. Right.
Well, and sometimes they can take those short form things and eventually they become something bigger. How many times have we heard people say, yeah, this was my blog and I turned it into a book. And there's, clearly it's different writing when you're doing that. But if you're keeping in mind, eventually it's going to be a book. You're going to write your blog differently, things like that.
Absolutely.
Well, how do people find you and connect with you?
The best place is through my website, which is lauraiswriting.com. And over there, you can also get a free copy of How to Write This Book. So you'll get a PDF version delivered straight to your inbox if you pop your email in over there. And any questions, you can always just email me as well.
Perfect. I love it. I love it. And it, like we said, doesn't matter that you're in Portugal. This is a virtual world. We all adapt. We do different things. We do what we have to make things work. And so that's where it's great. Well, we have just, a little bit of time left. So what final thoughts would you like to leave everyone with?
I think that one of the most common things I hear is, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to write a book. I would love to do it. It's on my bucket list, but I don't know if I have anything to say. And I think just try, see what happens, give it a shot. The worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't sell. And then you've still done something which a lot of people will never get around to. And, it can be a daunting undertaking, but people really underestimate the value of their stories. Even if you don't think you have a fascinating life or you don't think you're interesting enough or successful or rich enough, there's still going to be an audience for what you have to teach, and people are hungry more than ever for information. There are so many opportunities out there to connect with other people and to teach other people and establish yourself as a really important force in somebody's life. And I think doing it through a book is just such a huge opportunity. So I would say, even if you think you're not the most interesting person, there are ways to make your stories interesting, and I think it's a loss if the world doesn't hear your story.
I love it. I love it. Well, Laura, this has been wonderful. And I hope that people will really be thinking, okay, what book can I write? Because it's a great business tool for getting your message and your information out there, especially when we're not able to meet with people as much in person. And I think we're going to stay with that. It's not going to be that we flip a switch, because mostly a lot of it, we're going to be, it's just like what you and I are doing. We're thousands of miles apart. And people are going, wow, this works really pretty well. I think that's going to be one of the things. But until the next time we chat, hope we do chat again. I'm Deb Creer. I've been having a delightful conversation with Laura Gale, and everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.